Hello, back again on the Top Recap channel. This time I will tell a movie's entitled Con Air. Let's get straight into the storyline. The story begins by showing the disbandment of the United States Army Ranger team that has completed its mission to fight. One of the sergeants, Cameron Poe, finally returned to his hometown in Alabama and met his wife, Tricia, who turned out to be pregnant. At a bar, a group of thugs targeted and tried to harass Tricia. Poe, who saw this, intends to teach them a lesson, but Tricia forbids it. After returning from the bar, the thugs came back and intercepted them, and finally, a fight ensued. Under pressure, Poe accidentally kills one of them and gets himself arrested on charges of taking the life of another person. At the police station, his lawyer advised Poe to confess his guilt in the hope that he would be compensated with a sentence of 1 to 4 years in prison. If he did not confess, his sentence would be much more severe, 10 years in prison. However, his lawyer's assumption was apparently wrong, because even though Poe had confessed, the judge still sentenced him to 10 years in federal prison. In prison, Poe wrote to Tricia that he regretted not being able to witness the birth of his much-anticipated child. Poe also had a friend there named Mike. Day after day passed, and his beautiful daughter, Casey, was born. Casey also often sends letters to her father, who is in prison, but Poe did not allow his daughter to visit him because he did not want her to see prison life, which could have a negative influence on her life later. Unnoticed time continued to pass, and finally, Poe would get his freedom and meet his daughter right on her birthday. Poe then took the time to buy his daughter a doll as a birthday present. After undergoing an examination by the United States Parole Commission, Poe was finally released on parole. But his best friend was saddened because he was still a long way from gaining the freedom that Poe had. I'm going home, son! Finally, when his release date came, he and Mike would fly on an aeroplane belonging to the United States Marshal. The plane carries prisoners to be transferred. However, unlike Poe, who had been released and was just hitchhiking back to his hometown in Alabama to meet his wife and child, the flight was also very special because it carried several inmates to Feltham in Alabama. Feltham Penitentiary in Alabama is a prison for the worst criminals, some of whom are sentenced to life and even death. While on the bus, Mike told a female officer named Officer Bishop that he had to have an insulin injection before boarding the plane because he was diabetic. Meanwhile, Cameron Poe will still be handcuffed despite being paroled. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the United States Marshal Service aircraft hangar, preparations are being made to bring in high-profile prisoners. A member of the United States Marshals named Vince Larkin explained that 6 prisoners would be dropped off in Carson City and the rest would be taken to Feltham Prison. The plane would also be supervised by DEA members, led by Duncan Malloy. Duncan then met Vince Larkin. A DEA member named Willie was assigned to disguise himself as a prisoner to keep an eye on the prisoners on the plane. Duncan reminded him to bring his gun, but Larkin said that weapons should not be on his plane. Duncan finally relented and ordered Willie to give his gun to Larkin. But apparently, when getting ready to board the plane, Duncan deliberately inserted the gun in Willie's sock. Long story short, the transfer preparations were underway. One by one, high-level prisoners were transferred from the bus to the plane, including William Bedford, aka Billy, who was a mass murderer. Nathan Jones, or Diamond Dog, is a bomber at the National Rifle Association White People's Meeting. Next is the inmate who has committed all crimes such as kidnapping, robbery, murder, and extortion, committed by an inmate named Cyrus Grissom, commonly referred to as Cyrus the Virus. Next is Cameron Poe, who is of course the inmate we already know. At that time, an officer named Falzon confiscated a photo of Casey that was in Poe's shirt pocket. Cameron Poe also promised that he would take back the photo. On the plane, there is also Pinball Parker, a robber and drug dealer. There is also Johnny, a sadistic rapist who has raped 23 women. Johnny seems to be attracted to Officer Bishop. Before departing, Officer Falzon gave a few directions and rules for the prisoners on the plane. He threatened a beating if any of the inmates tried to act up.
There's a hint of trouble if any.
But when the plane was preparing to take off, it turned out that one of the prisoners, Cyrus, had hidden a needle in the skin of his hand. It seems that he plans to create chaos on the plane. Long story short, the plane finally flew, and Cyrus opened his handcuffs, while Pinball hid a lighter and some oil in his throat. I don't know what he's planning. It looks like these prisoners have planned something big on the plane. Pinball suddenly set fire to an inmate next to him, causing the guards to focus on Pinball. At that moment, Officer Bishop pulled Pinball away from the fire, but it turns out that Pinball actually took advantage of the opportunity to take the key from Officer Bishop and open Nathan's cage. Cameron Poe began to panic because he saw the actions of these prisoners. Nathan, who had finally escaped, managed to kill one of the officers. Officer Falzon was able to paralyze Nathan, but Pinball managed to open Cyrus's cage. The pilot ordered his co-pilot, Max, to remove the gun from the box because he felt the situation was chaotic. Max finally came out, and unfortunately, Cyrus blocked him and made his shot miss and killed 2 prisoners. Unfortunately, Max also had to be shot dead by Cyrus, and now Cyrus managed to grab one of the guns on the plane. Cyrus then took control of the plane and threatened the pilot to convey information that the situation on the plane was fine. Cyrus then opened fire and said that he was the plane's captain from now on.
Welcome to Con Air.
One by one, the officers were handcuffed and then put in a cage. Cyrus also freed Billy from his cage. Meanwhile, Johnny, who saw Officer Bishop helpless in the cage, planned to rape her. Poe, who noticed this, then thwarted Johnny's action.
Ugly all day.
Cyrus, who saw this incident, defended Poe because Poe really hated rapists. Cyrus also forced Officer Falzon to provide information about the prisoners who would descend on Carson City. Because he was threatened, Officer Falzon was honest with Cyrus that in Carson City, 6 prisoners would go down and 10 prisoners would go up. Cyrus also plans to land in Carson City and devise ways to keep his plan from the police. But suddenly Willie, a DEA agent who had been freed by Pinball, took Pinball hostage and told Cyrus to surrender. But Poe said that Willie was doing something he couldn't control. Willie's efforts will cause casualties, especially since Cyrus is also holding Officer Bishop hostage. Willie, who lost concentration, was finally shot dead by Cyrus. Cyrus then praised Poe for losing Willie's concentration earlier and began to trust Poe. Problems then befell them because 3 of the 6 prisoners who were going down in Carson City had actually died. Cyrus then looked for 3 volunteers to be deployed in Carson City. Initially, Poe was willing to volunteer, but he abandoned his intention after knowing that his mouth would be gagged and his head would be covered when he got off the plane. Plus, Poe was also worried about the condition of his best friend, who had not received an insulin injection. In the end, Cameron Poe chooses Officer Falzon to replace him, and Poe manages to retrieve the photo of his daughter that Officer Falzon had previously confiscated. Meanwhile, in California, several police officers checked the cells the prisoners had abandoned. At that time, the police were checking Cyrus's cell. It turns out that in Cyrus's cell, a hole was found in the wall, and inside the wall, a map of the plane that took him to the new prison was found. There were also some of Cyrus's notes. Larkin, who examined it, finally became suspicious of Cyrus's plan to escape. Finally, the plane landed in Carson City, which was hit by a storm. Apparently, this storm turned out to smooth out the plan of Cyrus, who was then disguised as a police officer who escorted 6 prisoners down there, and 10 prisoners at that time were put on the plane, including Cindino. Cindino and Garland Green are very terrible criminals and are feared by other prisoners who have slaughtered 30 people. When boarding the plane, the 10 prisoners were surprised and happy to see that the prisoners had taken control of the plane. Swamp Thing, a newly boarded prisoner, replaced the pilot who had been dropped off in Carson City. Swamp Thing turned out to have expertise in piloting planes. He cleverly moved the plane's transponder and told Pinball to install it on a tourist plane so that their plane would not be tracked by radar. Meanwhile, Cameron Poe turns out to have inserted a recording device in Officer Falzon's shirt. The device then fell, and the police who saw it reported to the U.S. Marshal that the police on the plane turned out to be fake police. The police officers moved quickly, but Cyrus realized that the police already knew their plan. Quickly, Swamp Thing flew his plane and left Pinball still below, and Pinball had to die trying to get on the plane. The prisoners successfully flew back to their freedom. They all laughed with satisfaction because they had fooled the police by moving the transponder to the tourist plane. Elsewhere, Duncan arrived at the U.S. Marshal Service. He then questioned Larkin about what had happened. He was shocked to find out that his men had died. Duncan was then angry with Larkin, who felt that his men had died because of Larkin's mistake. But Larkin rejected the accusation because it was Duncan's men who were guilty of bringing a gun onto the plane. Duncan then planned to take the short route by shooting down the plane using his combat helicopter. Larkin then tracked the plane's whereabouts, and of course, what he tracked was the location of the tourist plane. Meanwhile, on board the plane that had been hijacked by the prisoners, Cameron Poe ventured to meet Cyrus to find out their plan, and finally, Cyrus told him their master plan. Meanwhile, in Alabama, Trisha and Casey were seen waiting for the presence of Poe, who had been released. However, an officer from the U.S. Marshal named Grand told her that there was a slight problem on her husband's flight, and she was asked to meet his boss, Vince Larkin. At the Marshal's office, Larkin Larkin told his boss that on the plane, they had a party favoring the police officer, Cameron Poe. Cameron Poe has indeed been declared free and should have been dropped off in Carson City, but he refused to get off. That means Cameron Poe has a plan for the plane, especially since he is a United States Army Ranger who is confident in his abilities. But Duncan still insisted on shooting down the plane controlled by the prisoners. Unfortunately, Larkin's superiors also agreed with Duncan's proposal. The helicopter arrived to pick up Duncan and his boss. Larkin again tried to convince his superior to cancel Duncan's plan, but Larkin's boss, Devers, refused, and the helicopter departed for its mission. Luckily, they didn't realize that the plane they were chasing was a tourist plane. Meanwhile, on board the plane, Nathan ordered Cameron Poe to fix the wheels that could not be closed completely. Apparently, Pinball's body caused the wheels to not close perfectly. At that time, Cameron Poe planned to send a message to Larkin about where Cyrus was headed. Poe also wrote a message on the shirt worn by Pinball and dropped Pinball's body outside the plane. Of course, Poe hopes that Larkin can find and read the message. However, one of the prisoners, Billy, was suspicious of Poe because he felt he did not know Cameron Poe, who claimed to be from Quentin Prison and had been sentenced to 15 years. Meanwhile, at the United States Marshal's office, Larkin finally told Trisha the bad news that her husband had decided not to get off the plane and continue his journey with the dangerous prisoners. Trisha then understood her husband's decision to stay on the plane. His savior soul as a ranger is still there in Cameron Poe. Suddenly, Larkin gets information from an officer that a corpse has been found falling from the sky, and the corpse has his name written on it. Larkin finally realized that they were headed to the Lerner runway. He immediately contacted Duncan and told him to turn around and go to Lerner Airport because Duncan was on the wrong track. But Duncan remained adamant and did not believe Larkin. He even felt that this was Larkin's plan to cancel his plan to bring down his target aircraft. Seeing this, Larkin decided to leave alone for Lerner's airport. Meanwhile, on the plane, Billy is checking Cameron Poe's belongings in the trunk. Poe, who at that time saw Billy, who had learned his identity, was angry because he threw the doll he would give to his daughter. Long story short, Poe finally managed to kill Billy. Meanwhile, Duncan managed to arrive at the location indicated by the transponder, and when they were about to shoot, they were suddenly surprised because what they were chasing was a tourist plane. They also decided to switch to the Lerner runway, according to the information provided by Larkin. Long story short, Larkin, who was driving Duncan's car, finally arrived at the Lerner runway. He then hid. Apparently at Lerner Airport, the plane that was preparing to pick up Cyrus was hijacked by Sandino's friends. Long story short, the plane managed to land unevenly on the Lerner runway. The plane got stuck and sank part of the aeroplane body into the ground. The prisoners then got off and celebrated their freedom. Meanwhile, Cyrus asked Sandino about the plane that would take them away, but Sandino only told Cyrus to remain patient. Cameron Poe intends to go down to look for injections for his best friend, then saw Nathan about to kill the 3 remaining police officers, but Poe managed to stop him and said that the hostages should be kept before Sandino's plane arrived. It turns out that Cyrus even sided with Poe and ordered Nathan to take a tractor to pull the trapped plane. Poe then continued his goal to find an injection for Mike. Unfortunately, he was beaten by Sandino's friends, and when he was about to be shot, Larkin came to his rescue, and Cameron Poe took advantage of the moment to kill all of Sandino's friends. But one person managed to survive because he hid in the plane. After the conditions are safe, Cameron Poe tells Larkin to leave a message for his wife, saying he loves her, but can't just leave his injured friend. Meanwhile, Johnny saw the group of officers coming towards him. He then told Nathan to convey the message to Cyrus that in 12 minutes, the police group would arrive. The prisoners then pulled the trapped plane as soon as possible so that it could fly again. However, Sandino ran away to his plane. Larkin then tried to find a way to stop the Sandino. He drove heavy equipment and intercepted Sandino's plane. The plane then crashed into an oil tank, and Cyrus, who saw Sandino's betrayal, then burned him to death and caused the gas tank to explode. Luckily, Poe managed to jump and survive the explosion. While falling under the car, Cameron Poe meets an old man who informs him about the first aid kit that Poe is looking for. Meanwhile, Cyrus and other inmates plan to trap the convoy of officers heading to his place. They are then armed and prepared in their respective places. The convoy was getting closer, and the prisoners managed to paralyze one by one the officers who were chasing him. Cameron Poe, who had managed to get an injection, then ran towards the plane. Before getting on the plane, he tied the plane so that it could slow down a little. little. Poe also returned to save Officer Bishop, who again wanted to be raped by Johnny. While outside the plane, Cyrus and his friends, who were pressed, ran up to it and intended to fly. Cyrus then managed to untie the plane, but unfortunately, Duncan's luxury car had to become a victim because it was tied to the plane's rope. Larkin apologized to Duncan for borrowing his luxury car without permission. The plane finally managed to fly, and the prisoners partied on the plane. Unfortunately, Nathan managed to find a letter belonging to Cameron Poe, written by Casey, and reported it to Cyrus. Cyrus then took Officer Bishop hostage and forced the prisoners to confess that who had reported to the officers in Carson City, who had killed Billy, and who had tied the plane. Mike suddenly admitted that he was the culprit. Cyrus finally shoots Mike and reads Casey's letter, which Cameron Poe hears. Cyrus had not finished speaking when suddenly Duncan and Larkin's helicopter shot him. Larkin then forced Cyrus to surrender, but Cyrus continued to fight. Meanwhile, Cameron Poe runs out of patience and intends to finish off Cyrus. Cameron Poe managed to lock up Cyrus and his friends so that he could visit Swamp Thing at the plane's controls and force him to land. Duncan initially intended to shoot down the plane, but abandoned his intention after Poe managed to contact him and informed him that he had taken control of the plane. An angry Cyrus was taken down by Officer Bishop. The plane prepares to land on a public road in Las Vegas. Larkin tried to clear the road so that the plane could land. Swamp Thing then landed immediately and crashed into a casino in Las Vegas. Cyrus, who managed to wake up, then intended to shoot Cameron Poe, but failed because the plane was split in two because it was cut by the propeller of the plane. Soon, the plane stopped, and all the prisoners were finally captured. Officer Bishop and Mike also survived. Officer Bishop then thanked Cameron Poe for saving her, but it turns out that Cyrus and Swamp Thing tried to escape through the bottom of the plane. Luckily, Larkin and Poe saw it. They both then chased Cyrus, who escaped using a fire truck. The chase ensued. In short, Poe and Larkin managed to climb onto the fire truck. Poe then faced Cyrus, while Larkin faced Swamp Thing. A fierce fight ensued, and they finally managed to kill Cyrus and Swamp Thing. Cameron Poe then picked up the doll that had fallen, which he would give to his daughter as a birthday present. Poe also thanked Larkin. Larkin also finally reconciled with Duncan, who had given up his luxury car and regretted not trusting Larkin before. At the end of the movie, Cameron Poe meets Trisha and Casey. Cameron Poe apologized for leaving them both and promised not to leave them again. It turns out that the only criminal who was not caught was Garland Green, who was seen gambling in a casino. And the movie is over. Don't forget to click subscribe, like, and comment.